Let's discuss further with someone who represents New York City. Congresswoman Nicole Malliotakis represents Staten Island and southern Brooklyn. Thanks so much for taking the time this morning.
It's good to be with you.
Before we get to the situation in New York, I do want to talk about the broader immigration picture. Encounters are now down at the border by more than half to about 4,000 a day from 10,000 or so prior to the expiration of Title 42. Migrants along the border are telling our reporters there that they've in effect heard that message from agents from the Biden administration that if they enter illegally, they face penalties, including the possibility of being banned for 5 years. I wonder, what do you, following this issue closely, credit that drop in encounters to?
Well, I'm hoping that they take the step even further. I know that you're saying that there's a momentary drop here at the border, but you're still seeing this influx of individuals coming to New York City, and so therefore it's still a crisis, whether they are not specifically being encountered by CBP or they're going through other areas of the border undetected. We don't know the answer to that right now. But what I would say is it's a combination of making sure that we give our Customs and Border Patrol agents the tools that they've asked for, certainly making sure that we reinstate in the message that the Biden administration has now said that they are going to have to apply from their next country that is safe for them to apply for asylum, not skip 6-7 countries to come to the U.S. border. That should be helpful. But we also know that the Biden administration is appealing a decision by the court, which Florida had a lawsuit, and the decision basically said that they could no longer release individuals into the country without a court date or without knowing their whereabouts. And so that, I think, has temporarily helped as well, even though the Biden administration is appealing that decision.
Well, the issue with that is numbers, really, because the Biden administration is saying that they're holding areas along the border if they are just not big enough to handle the influx, right? I mean, so the question is, you've supported legislation that will add agents along the border. How about judges? If you have more judges, you can hear more cases more quickly, and therefore folks wouldn't be waiting as long in the country to have their cases adjudicated.
Yes, and that is something that I've also suggested. I think that's a combination of these things. You need to have stricter border security provisions. You need to streamline the process to make sure that judges and asylum officers can differentiate between legitimate asylum seekers and those who are not. We know in our courts under the Biden administration, 2/3 of individuals over the past year were denied actually asylum, which means that there are individuals using asylum to enter our country. And it's also creating a tremendous backlog for true asylum seekers. In New York City, it's about a decade wait now to get a court date as a result. So you're actually hurting legitimate asylum seekers by having this type of process in place that is not strict enough.
You know that the law as it stands, right, is that if you have a case that is deemed, well, if you're not turned around right away or entering illegally, you have a chance to be heard, and while that case is being heard, you can remain in the country. At the end of the day, if folks want that law to be changed, they got to sit down at the table and pass a new law to change the law. Would you be willing to sit down with Democrats? This is the thing we haven't seen, right, is Democrats and Republicans try to pass a bipartisan reform act. Would you be willing to sit down with Democrats to negotiate such potential changes to the law?
And I've already spoken to Democrats about this. Obviously, the border security that the House passed last week, that's a major part of the problem. We need to stem the flow first. We could deal with the other issues. But certainly, we should be looking at increasing the number of work visas, of family-sponsored visas, of adding judges, as I mentioned before. But again, we have to stem the flow. You can't be doing one thing without the other. And I think it's incredibly important that the Democrats recognize that. I mean, the House passed our bill, and it's my hope that the Senate will pass something, and then we can reconcile the two in a conference. Either that or the president needs to do things via executive order, just how he quite frankly created this crisis at the beginning of his term, via executive order.
To be fair, the numbers in terms of encounters not that different between the Trump and Biden administration. I do want to ask you about George Santos
but honestly, look at New York City, and you're going to tell me that the numbers are not different between the Biden administration and the Trump administration.
What's changed there is not
right now.
That's not flow across the border, though. That's because you have governors down south sending them up north to your city.
6 million individuals have come into our country. 6 million. And 1.2 of them are gotaways where we don't even know where they are in our country. And then our mayor is misinterpreting the right to shelter law and allowing individuals to be housed in hotels and schools. And that's, quite frankly, it's very wrong. You should not be doing that. And my mayor should be challenging that right to shelter law because no other city in America is doing that.
I'm not disputing the numbers. I'm just saying that what's changed between those two is that folks are getting shipped up to cities like yours that they were not in the past. I do want to ask you about your colleague, George Santos, because as you know, he's been charged with multiple felonies now. You released a statement on May 9th to Axios saying the sooner he leaves, the sooner we can win the seat with someone who isn't a liar. As you know, there's a vote coming before the House to remove him. Will you vote to remove him?
Well, I want to see how that bill comes to the floor, because it's not my understanding that it may be a vote to send it to the ethics committee, not just directly expelling him. But what I will say, and I stick to the words of the other day, that I do believe the sooner he leaves, the better off it will be for this institution, the better it will be for his constituents, and quite frankly, the better it will be for our country. We have too many problems right now dealing with a debt crisis, dealing with this border crisis, to be talking about George Santos.
Well, but you could help make that sooner if you were to vote to remove him. Will you vote to remove him?
Well, we'll have to see what the bill, again, I'm not going to comment until I see the actual bill. I'm not opposed to it, let's put it that way.
Okay, fair enough. Congresswoman, we appreciate you having you on. You're always welcome on this broadcast. And as a New Yorker, I'm particularly open to New Yorkers coming on the show. So thanks for joining us today.
I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Boris. Still ahead,